Hi, the internet. My name is Ben. I spent 16 years as an employee of the Catholic Church, including the last 3 as an assistant principal of a Catholic school, and Donald Trump made me an atheist. Hey everyone, and welcome back to How Donald Trump Made Me an Atheist. This is part 6. Unbelievable. If you've missed any of the previous parts, please click here or here. I don't know where it's going to be. It'll be somewhere. So this is the episode that's caused me the most dread going in, because for this entire process, I've been trying to make my religious viewers, especially Christians, realize that I was in your corner, right? I really did believe all of these things. There's been some light to intense mockery. The "Were Jesus George" bit in the last episode was pretty irreverent. I stand by it, though. That was a good joke. I hope it's clear, though, that I was mocking beliefs that I also espoused as an adult. Uh, Holding irrational beliefs doesn't make anyone stupid, and getting rid of irrational beliefs doesn't make anyone smart. But I've been taking pained efforts to make sure that my Christian audience realizes that I actually did believe all of this stuff. And while we may not have agreed on every theological issue, the Venn diagram has a huge overlapping region. That's what I've been doing, but this is the one where I make no one happy. Because as we do a review of my understanding of Catholicism, I'm going to make any Catholic who's even approaching orthodoxy think that I was always some traitor. And any Protestant Christian who rejects Rome entirely is going to think I'm a patsy, because I end up finding some middle ground that we'll get into. But even though my entire Christian audience is going to be mad at me at the end, I'm diving in anyway. At the conclusion of my previous video, I argued that any evidence for the resurrection was insufficient for belief, but that God planned it that way because God had some reason to value people drawing conclusions about their beliefs based on faith. So the idea that we accept the resurrection on faith was meritorious. In episode 4, I made the case that the Bible should not be viewed as an inerrant source of divine truth, that at best it was humanity's reckoning with what they believed about God. It was people writing what they believed were divine experiences. It got more accurate as it progressed along. The Old Testament has some major problems. The people of Samaria must bear their guilt because they have rebelled against their God. They will fall by the sword. Their little ones will be dashed to the ground, their pregnant women ripped open. Which does stand in stark contrast to something like this.
We're just here defending life.
All right, cool.
It's great. Because we don't like the murder of unborn children.
And now the New Testament was better, but it also has mistakes like this one. Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. That last little bit might sound lovely and all, and I included it to make sure no one accused me of taking the Bible out of context, but that passage is inherently evil, if for no other reason than suggesting that if someone is abusive to you, you should just bear that abuse and think of Jesus. That has bad results. Don't do that. Anyway, I could look at passages like that from the Bible and say, in fact, these are problematic passages. But it's okay because the Bible represents baby steps along the journey towards understanding the divine. But the question is, what represents humanity's best effort to understand the divine today? What shapes our picture of God today, now that those two things, the Old and New Testament, are immutable? They will not change or update. If they have problems, those problems will always be there and they can't fix themselves. What represents the continuation of that process? And to me, that was what I thought was the responsibility of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was responsible, after all, for the compilation of the Bible in the first place at the councils of Nicaea and Constantinople. And Protestants are going to be engaged in some pretty circular reasoning here if they want to understand how the Bible got to be what it is in the first place. I never heard a satisfactory answer to the question, well, how do you know that all the books in the Bible are the right ones? Who did you trust to gather and compile all of this information? And I would start away confidently from that conversation, knowing that it was the Catholic Church, a group of priests and bishops who God ordained specifically for the purpose of protecting those books and those truths. But more than just the Biblical Editorial Review Board, I understood the Catholic Church to be the remnant of Jesus' original mission, and that's what Catholics the world over generally believe. And actually, when you take a 2 millennia long view, this understanding makes a lot of sense. So the Catholic Church teaches that priests can only become priests by being ordained by bishops, and that bishops can only be ordained by other bishops. And those bishops were ordained by bishops, and those bishops were ordained by bishops, and those bishops were all ordained by the apostles, who were ordained by Jesus Christ himself. And so the Catholic understanding of the priesthood and the hierarchy is that all of these people are following in this sort of direct ancestry of blessings back to Jesus. How these words carry authority but nothing else does, essentially what they're saying is that the original blessing that Jesus bestowed upon his apostles is preserved today through a process that they call Apostolic Succession. There's actually a website online that chronicles the apostolic lineage of every bishop in the world. If you know any Catholic priest in the world and you can figure out what bishop ordained them, you can use this website to determine which bishop ordained that bishop and trace it all the way back to Jesus. And irrespective of what your belief system is, that is cool. There's some appeal to that. The giant caveat here is that most bishops cannot, in fact, trace their lineage back to Jesus. Not even close, really. The website I'm talking about, the link's in the description, you can get most bishops back to about the year 1500, but that's about it when it stalls out. Right? Just as soon as you get going, the host finishes before you get the result you're looking for, an experience that Catholic wives are all too familiar with. But listen, go ahead and talk to devout Catholics. They will talk about apostolic succession like it has the evidentiary backing of evolution's common descent. They think that this is rock solid, and it isn't. I expect that most Catholics would be genuinely surprised if they found out that their parish priest could not trace their apostolic lineage back past the 1400s. The importance of that unbroken chain is hard to overstate in the minds of Catholics, but I'm telling you, and again, while I am going to reveal to you in moments that I was not the most dogmatic or orthodox Catholic, I can tell you that I did run in those circles. Orthodox Catholics will think that their parish priest can trace his lineage back to Jesus when in fact he cannot in all likelihood do so. And they think it's really important. They think the documentation is there, but it's not. The Catholic Church not only derives its current authority from this apostolic lineage, but also all of its sacramental practices and any authoritative statements from the past. So think about some hot button issues in Catholicism, and one you would immediately jump to is women priests. Let's forget for a moment that any of these policies I'm about to discuss is based on outdated modes of sex and gender. But if you were to ask a practicing Catholic why women can't be priests, you will get a really instructive answer. Might not be right away, but eventually you'll get to it. They will either say this or they will quote from this apostolic letter from Pope John Paul II, in which he states that if you ask a devout Catholic why women can't be priests, they will invariably get to this answer. They will refer you to an apostolic letter from Pope John Paul II, in which he states that the Church has no authority to confer priestly ordination on women. And that's it. They don't have the authority. They'll either quote that line to you or they'll just say it. Well, the Church hasn't the authority to ordain women. And that's it. That's the conversation stopper. You're done. You could make really strong logical arguments for why women ought to be able to be priests, and they will look at you and might say, well, that makes good sense to me, but too bad the Church doesn't have the authority to do it. Now, to be clear, Pope John Paul II does lay out what he would call logical arguments for why women cannot be priests and why the Church has not the authority to do so. But I hope I'm being clear that my thesis really has nothing to do with the underlying reason for why women should or shouldn't be priests. But that Catholics would say, well, we don't have the authority, is instructive. It tells us a lot about what makes Catholics tick. Why would you appeal to whether or not anyone has the authority? The idea that the Catholic faith and Catholic theology are both ancient and able to be traced back to Jesus himself really speaks to Catholics on two levels, and to me, myself. First, it makes us feel confident that what we believe is true, that the central tenets of Catholicism have been preserved in this sacred trust by the Catholic Church, that their job was to preserve these truths. And then second, perceiving a connection to generations past is deeply appealing. Think about it. If you went to visit a tribe of indigenous people in America and they were demonstrating some of their customs and were going to perform a rain dance, it wouldn't even matter to you if you believed this dance had any effect on the weather, or even if they believed it had any effect on the weather. It might be really, really interesting and moving to watch these people engage in a dance that transcends generations back to time immemorial of what these people thought about how nature worked. That would be cool, even if you didn't believe it. When you think of the church's primary mission as a safekeeper of divine truth, it can allow you to excuse them for their organizational dipshittery, we'll call it. Let's take the abuse crisis. Lots of Catholics ended up leaving the faith because they were caused to re-examine things because they felt betrayed by bishops. But lots of other Catholics, myself included, even though I was very close to this issue, we were able to kind of move past that and say, well, it was horrible and people should go to jail perhaps. Bishops should go to jail even. But that's not part of the primary mission of the church. The primary mission of the church isn't to turn in bishops or priests for abusing people. Their primary mission is to preserve the truth of Jesus Christ. All right. Now, saying all of those nice things about the Catholic Church hurt me now as an ex-Catholic, but it also probably pissed off a bunch of Protestants who are still watching. Don't worry. Now it's time to piss off the Catholics. Even in high school, even in college, I could look at specific dogmatic teachings of the Catholic Church and say, well, that's bullshit. To many devout Catholics, I just disqualified myself from ever having been a true Catholic. I'm out. I'm out now because I just said that I never actually fully believed everything the Catholic Church taught. They say I was never a true Catholic. Doesn't matter that I spent 3 years as an assistant principal or 8 years teaching in a Catholic school or 6 years in youth ministry before that, bringing people to Christ as I thought I was doing. It doesn't matter. I wasn't really a Catholic because I never accepted the Church's true authority as bestowed by Jesus Christ. Quick side note, it would shock me to learn that Catholics aren't disproportionately into BDSM. I mean, with all of their talk about who's the authority and who's the submitter, honestly, I haven't been Catholic in a couple of years now, and my blood pressure is still spiking. Just talking about all this, my nipples are measurably harder, I think. But here's my point. Anyone who doesn't consider every teaching of the Catholic Church as authoritative is considered by some to not really be a Catholic. But that never bothered me, and it's for two reasons. The first is that the areas in which I disagreed with the Catholic Church's conclusions, I could look at logically and say that I was right and the Church was wrong. And the second was this. It was like a little bit of a loophole. I could just say, well, your teaching that you are infallible is in fact fallible. I dispute it, and then I can cross out line by line doctrinal issues I disagree with and can still consider myself Catholic because I still looked at their sacramental procedures as binding, right? A Catholic baptism, Catholic communion, all of the teachings and all of the strictures that went along with those things I accepted. I just didn't accept that they owned every part of my conscience. I could, with little concern for whether or not someone else thought I was Orthodox, I could consider myself a good Catholic in good standing by assessing the Catholic Church as humanity's ongoing project towards bettering their understanding of God. Archbishop Fulton Sheen put it this way.
What then is the proper attitude to take toward all world religions? Well, really the proper attitude to take is that there's something good in all of them. Perfect truth is really like a circle. Now, truth is like that circle. It has 360 degrees. And that fullness would be found, for example, in the fullness of Christ's mystical body. Now, we are to think of every religion under the sun having something good. Maybe some religion that's started this afternoon in Los Angeles. That's got some good in it. We only have 10 degrees, but it's got some good. Buddhism, Confucianism, all the other world religions, they've all got good in them. Then you get the others, maybe they'll have something like 240 degrees of truth. Therefore, our attitude is not to be constantly pointing out the error, looking for the defects, seeking what is black, but rather laying hold of what is good. And so, with world religions, everything is good. We can just as well start Christianity, start it with Buddhism and Confucianism as we started with Plato and Aristotle. Remember that what is true in them comes from God. What is erroneous comes from us.
Even at my most devout, I would have modified that metaphor to say that the Catholic Church is the furthest around the circle, but not all the way around, that it's still working towards perfection. But that still allowed me to do two things. First, I can excuse Catholicism's flaws because I don't need them to be inerrant. It's not a hill I need to die on. And second, I can excuse Christianity for stealing ideas from other religions. I can just say, well, okay, yeah. I mean, they stumbled upon part of a theological truth, and the Catholic Church came in and recognized, oh, hey, that's part of a theological truth. Let's round that out. So I would interpret the teachings of the church as useful information, sage advice that ought to be valued, but that isn't necessarily perfect in nature or inerrant. And what I'm describing is a version of pluralism, that other religions can be right in some ways, but my religion is more right. And people have objections to pluralism, but I was able to get around those pretty easily. So an atheist could say to me, well, wait a minute, if you're a pluralist, doesn't that mean you have to accept mutually exclusive truths from different faiths? To which I would say, no. I accept that other religions can find truth, divine truth, in their own faith, but that the Catholic Church had a more holistic view of the truth. And when those things are at loggerheads, we evaluate those and determine which one is better. And I see the Catholic Church as being more frequently right. Boom. Orthodox Catholics, on the other hand, would raise a very different objection. They would say something to me like this.
Oh, you think you can pick and choose which teachings of the church are true? Doesn't that make you the arbiter of what is truth? Do you really think you're wiser than a 2,000-year-old church founded by Jesus Christ? Aren't you making yourself the authority at that point?
Can you shut the fuck up about authority for 1 minute? I mean, seriously, go get some money, go find a dominatrix, and pay her to slap you around for a little while, and then we can talk like grown-ups. But the answer to your question, though, doesn't that make you the authority? The answer is, kinda, yeah. But you do the same thing. You have decided that the Catholic Church is some cosmic and eternal authority, but how did you determine that they were a good authority? And there were two answers I got on how they determined the Catholic Church was an authority. The first was this historical version where they would look back in the Catholic Church's history and determine that the Catholic Church had this unbroken line of succession, even though they don't. But even still, then they were assessing that this lineage of blessings was good enough to count as authoritative. They used some standard that they had in their own mind and said that the Catholic Church met that standard throughout its history, and so they are still authoritative. But then they were the ones who determined that the church was authoritative in the first place. They were the expert. They were the authority on who has authority. Actually, let's go back to the dominatrix thing here for a moment, because anyone who knows anything about BDSM will tell you that ultimately the person who is in charge in the situation is the sub, not the dom. The sub can withdraw consent at any point, and if they do, anything further is assault. Besides the historical version, I heard a moral argument for why the church is authoritative. In this version, the devotee would look at a series of moral issues and evaluate the Catholic Church's claims. Then they would see a pattern where the Catholic Church was consistently providing wisdom or a perspective that they seemed to think was beyond human comprehension. And then from there, they felt compelled to accept the Catholic Church's positions on all moral issues, right? And that's a fallacy, because if I get 4 lottery numbers right, that doesn't tell me anything about whether or not the 5th lottery number is right. What you would need is to demonstrate that you had a method for how you got the first 4 numbers right, and that would be instructive about what you could do with the 5th. But even that argument is undermined by the fact that they looked at those first set of moral precepts and used some standard to determine that the church had in fact provided otherworldly wisdom. Your evaluation that the church produced accurate moral positions implies that you agree with their conclusion. And the only way you can agree with their conclusion is if you have some internal standard of morality inside of you already, in which case you are the authority, or there's some external standard to both you and the Catholic Church, and you evaluated the church's position on that external standard, in which case you still don't need the church because you can just use that external standard. It's the Euthyphro dilemma pushed back to Catholicism. That's all it is. Actually, let's pop back to BDSM again. This has been fun. It's a little exciting. Because I have heard formerly devout Catholics justify their bigoted attitudes towards LGBT people by telling me that they were just doing what they believed was best because it was what the church taught. But I'm sorry, you always had the power to shirk that authority. Just like a sub taking a whip to the ass, at any point you were allowed to say, "No mas, I am done." This wasn't something I did. I never transferred agency of an abhorrent moral position to the church. But it occurs to me that devout Catholics could do some sort of mental floor routine to assuage some burning guilt they feel over the treatment of gay and trans people, people living with AIDS, women who became pregnant by rape. All of these people have been mistreated by the church. And instead of adopting the agency for that, they can push it off to Catholicism. Say, that's what the church teaches. I'm sorry. If you think you aren't to blame because you've deferred agency to the Catholic Church, know that I offer you no succor. I offer you no refuge until you own it. You own the position as something you wanted to believe or accepted. If you remained Catholic through all of this and weren't openly challenging the church's authority, you had to do one of two things. Either you believed it because you believed it and you deeply believed it, or you were carrying water for this organization while you had these misgivings and pretended like, oh, I don't have the authority to question anything. You get nothing.
You get nothing. You lose.
You get nothing from me in terms of mercy until you accept fully your responsibility for participating in this assholery. Apologize for it, and then we can move on. Don't pretend like it was the church's fault. It was your fault. Oh, now who's the Dom? I was talking to my folks the other day about why I want to do this project, about why this matters so much to me, and part of it is to make amends. I was as openly LGBT as I was able to be for my entire time in Catholicism, and actually, and I'll get into this in a future date, but it was the thing that caused me to resign. But that was recent. In the past, I've worked in schools, and I worked in youth ministry for a long time before that. There were kids in that youth ministry who were gay. I knew they were gay. They pretty much knew they were gay. And I think they knew that I knew that they were gay. We never talked about it because that wouldn't have been allowed. But I think we all kind of knew it. And I am still racked with guilt. I'm racked with guilt because I don't know. Because I think I gave them hope. I think I gave them hope on some level that they could be safe in a Catholic church, that they could find a home in Catholicism. If any of the kids in my youth group were struggling with gender identity or struggling with their sexuality, and for 1 second they stuck around in Catholicism because they looked at me and said, I think there's hope here. I think when I look at Ben and what Ben teaches and what Ben stands for, I think that's what Catholicism can be. And I'm going to stay with Catholicism and change it from the inside. And damn it, I think that probably hurt. My encouragement of gay kids to stay in the church because I thought they had a home there, I had no right to give them hope for that. I had no right to do that. It was false hope from a place of privilege because I had nothing to worry about. I'm the ideal candidate for a Catholic. Straight, cis, married, have kids on the way. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry if I made you stick with Catholicism. I'm sorry if Catholicism hurt you because I had convinced you that it was home. It was never your home. Fuck. That was a tough way to end. Brendan, Rosemary, Sasha, thanks for being patrons. I really could use more patrons. If that's something you can swing, it would be amazing. I can't remember what the next video is about. It's going to be good. Sorry I didn't dress up in costume. I had a plan to do to actually dress up as a dominatrix for part of this. Even the pleather costume was too expensive. So look, if you wanted to be a patron, this was your opportunity. You could have bought me that Dom costume, and I think we all would have been better off for that. Goodbye. I got a haircut in between recordings.